Sudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are reading the teachings of Lord Chaitanya um, by Srila Prabhupada, and we are in a chapter 20. The Mayavadi philosophers are converted. The living entities are factually beyond this covered inferior energy. The living entities have their pure spiritual existence and their pure identity, and they have their pure mental activities, and all of them are beyond the manifestation of cosmic world. The living entity, his mind, his intelligence, and his identity are beyond the range of this material world. But when he enters into the material world by his desire to lord it over matter, then his original mind, intelligence, and body become covered by the material energy. When he is again uncovered from these material or inferior energies, he is called liberated. And when he is liberated, he has no false ego. His real ego comes in again into existence. Foolish mental speculators think that after liberation, even the identity is lost. But that is not so, because we are eternally part and parcel. The living entity, when liberated, revives his original eternal part and parcel identity. Aham Brahmasmi, I am not this body, does not mean that I lose my identity. At the present moment, I say that I am matter, but in my liberated state, I will understand that I am not matter. I am spirit soul as part of the infinite. So to become, so to become Krishna conscious or spiritually conscious, and to be engaged in this loving transcendental service of Krishna is the sign of liberated state. In the Vishnu Purana, 6th chapter, 7th verse, it is very nicely and clearly stated. The energy of the Supreme Lord is divided into three: Para, Kshetrajna, and Avidya. Para energy is actually the energy of Supreme Lord. Kshetrajna energy is called the living entities, and Avidya energy is called the material world or Maya. It is called avidya or ignorance because under the spell of material energy, one forgets its actual position and its relationship with the Supreme Lord. It is concluded, therefore, that the living entities represent one of the energies of the Supreme Lord, such as infinitesimal part and parcel of Supreme Lord is called Jiva. If the Jiva is artificially put into the same level with the infinite Supreme, because both of them are Brahman, that will certainly lead to bewilderment. The Mayavadi philosophers are perplexed before a learned Vaishnava philosopher because the Mayavadis cannot explain the cause of bondage of the living entities. They simply say it is out of ignorance, but they cannot explain why the Supreme is covered by this ignorance. The actual solution is that living entities, although qualitatively one with the Supreme, is infinitesimal and is not infinite. Had they been infinite, there would not have been any possibility of being covered by ignorance. But because living entities are infinitesimal, they are covered by another inferior and energy. We can see their foolishness and ignorance when they try to explain the infinite is covered by the ignorance. It is an offensive attempt to qualify the infinite as subject to spell of ignorance. Shankara, although he attempted to cover the Supreme Lord by his Mayavadi philosophy, was doing so only by the order of Supreme Lord. It is to be understood that his teaching was a timely necessity, but not a permanent fact. In the Vedanta Sutra, this distinction between the energy and energetic is accepted by from the very beginning. In that Brahma or Vedanta Sutra, the first aphorism, Janmadhyasya, is a clear explanation that supreme absolute truth is the origin or source of all emanation. Therefore, the emanations are is energy, whereas is energetic. whereas he is energetic. Shankara has falsely put his argument in this way that if the transformation of energy is accepted, then the supreme absolute truth cannot remain immutable. But that is not true. In spite of unlimited energy being generated, why not accept the supreme absolute truth remains always the same? Even though there is the emanation of unlimited energies from him. Shankaracharya has therefore incorrectly and wrongly established the theory of illusion. In this connection, Ramanuja Acharya has discussed the point very nicely as follows. If you argue that before the creation of material world there was only one absolute truth, then how is it possible that the living entity emanated from him? If he was alone, how could he produce or generate the infinitesimal living entity? In reference to this question, the Vedas state that everything is generated from absolute truth. Everything is being maintained by absolute truth, and after annihilation, everything enters into him. From this statement of the Upanishad, it is clear that living entities enter into the supreme existence in their liberated state without changing their original constitutional position of activity. We must always remember that Supreme Lord has a creative function. Similarly, infinitesimal living entities have also creative function. When they are liberated and enter into the Supreme after dissolution of the material body, their creative function is not lost. On the contrary, the creative function of the living entities become properly manifested in the liberated state. If the living entities' activities are definitely manifested when he is in this material condition, then how is it possible that he is in the spiritual liberated stage? His activities can be stopped. Entering is therefore understood in the sense that the bird enters into the tree and the animal enters into the forest, or the flying vehicle enters into the sky. While explaining the core number one of the first chapter of the Vedanta Sutra, Shankara has last unceremoniously tried to explain that Brahman or Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal. Similarly, he has tried to twist most cunningly the doctrine of byproduct into the doctrine of state of change. Actually, there is no change of state of the Supreme Absolute. It is simply by his inconceivable power of doing things, there comes byproduct. A relative truth produced out of another truth is called transformation of the byproduct. For example, when a sitting chair is produced out of the crude wood, it is the transformation of byproduct. Similarly, the supreme absolute truth, Brahman, is immutable, and when we find a byproduct, the living entity or this cosmic manifestation, it is called transformation of that byproduct of a supreme. Another example can be cited in this connection, that of milk and yogurt. Yogurt is a transformation of milk. In this way, if we study the living entities and the cosmic manifestation, it will appear that they were not different from the original absolute truth. I think we can stop here. So this chapter is Mayavadi philosophers converted. Vishnu is the supreme infinite, whereas the living entities, which are sparks, are infinitesimal. And when the our infinitesimal body covered by material energy, you know, when he enters this material world by his desire to lord it over the matter, then his mind, intelligence, body, covered by material energy, and when he is liberated, you know, then he has no false ego. His real ego comes again into existence. It also mentioned that in a Supreme Lord, energy is divided into three parts. Para is a energy is actually the energy of Supreme Lord. Kshetrajna energy is called the living entities. Avidya energy is called the material world or Maya. So the Mayavadi philosopher just say, oh, it is out of ignorance, but they cannot explain why supreme is covered by the ignorance. The relative truth produced out of another truth is called transformation of byproduct. So here, sitting chair is produced out of crude wood. It is the transformation of byproduct. Similarly, um, supreme absolute truth, Brahman is immutable. When we find a byproduct, the living entity or cosmic manifestation, it is called the transformation of that byproduct of the supreme. And eh, I think that's what we learned. I think we can continue tomorrow. I think it's all about Mayavadi philosophy and how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is, explaining and defeating their concept and explaining, more in detail and detail.